Picture this. You are standing in the middle of a massive room. You are entirely surrounded by glowing computer screens.
Right. And it is totally silent.
Exactly. Silent, but the air is practically, vibrating with tension.
And on the screens, the numbers are just violently flashing red.
Millions, maybe even billions of dollars are just evaporating into thin air, like a global financial crash is unfolding right in front of you.
It is a terrifying scenario.
Right. Now, when we try to understand a moment like this, when a market bubble bursts or an inexplicable crash wipes out an economy, what do we usually look at?
Well, we usually look at interest rates or housing policies.
Yeah, central bank regulations, algorithmic trading models. We basically look at the math.
Exactly.
But today, we are going completely off that map.
Yeah.
Because we have this stack of incredibly fascinating source material by a researcher named John Coates.
And this is drawn directly from his time actually working on the Wall Street trading floors, right?
Yes, exactly. We are going to look past the spreadsheets today. We want to pivot to the actual biology of the people making the trades. Okay, let's unpack this.
It is an essential pivot because, honestly, we have entirely misunderstood what risk-taking actually is.
Absolutely.
Our culture, going all the way back to Plato and Descartes, has sold us this idea of a strict divide between the mind and the body.
The whole mind-body dualism thing.
Right. We are taught to believe that taking a financial risk is a purely intellectual affair. Like, it is just this bloodless calculation of probabilities happening somewhere in the pristine ether of the prefrontal cortex.
Just pure math in your head.
Exactly. But Coates' research, which is grounded in modern neuroscience and endocrinology, proves that this is just a dangerous fiction.
Completely.
When a trader sits in front of a screen and takes a massive financial position, it is a profoundly physical act.
Right, so not just a brain in a jar running a Monte Carlo simulation.
Far from it. The body treats that financial risk no differently than an early hominid facing down a predator on the savannah.
Wow, so the same exact alarm bells.
Yes. Our biology gears up, hormones flood our system, our metabolism shifts, and those physical changes feed right back into the brain.
Which completely alters how we think.
Right. Exactly. It changes how we perceive probability and ultimately how we act. We are looking at a system where biology dictates economics.
Not the other way around.
Precisely.
It is just wild to think that the fate of global financial systems rests not on complex economic theories, but on the chemical soup swishing around inside a few thousand people's brains and bodies.
It really is.
And to really get why this happens, we have to start with a fundamental misconception about what the brain is actually for. Because like you said, we have this Cartesian hangover.
Right.
We tend to think the brain is this pristine computer designed for pure abstract thought.
Mm-hmm.
But, evolutionarily speaking, that makes zero sense.
None at all.
The brain didn't evolve so we could sit around contemplating philosophy or solving algebraic equations. It evolved to coordinate complex physical movement in a dangerous three-dimensional space.
That is the core biological truth that economics usually ignores. And, well, there is perhaps no better illustration of this than the life cycle of the sea squirt.
Oh man, the sea squirt. This story is so bizarre.
It is. So the sea squirt, or the tunicate, is a small marine animal. It is actually a distant evolutionary cousin of ours, a chordate.
Right.
When the sea squirt is in its larval stage, it looks a bit like a tadpole. It has a primitive brain, an eye spot for sensing light, and a rudimentary organ for sensing gravity.
Okay.
And it uses this brain and nervous system to swim freely around the ocean. It navigates currents, avoids danger, and actively searches for a rich feeding ground.
So it is exploring. It needs the brain to process the sensory input of the ocean and translate that into the motor output of swimming.
Exactly. But once it finds a suitable rock to attach itself to, something truly extraordinary happens.
Yeah.
It cements itself headfirst to the rock, transitioning into an entirely stationary adult phase. It becomes a filter feeder.
Okay, so it stops moving forever.
Right. And because it will never need to move again for the rest of its life, the brain becomes a massive metabolic liability.
Because brain tissue takes up a ton of energy, right?
Exactly. Brain tissue is incredibly expensive to maintain in terms of calories. So the sea squirt literally digests its own brain and nervous system for energy.
It eats its own brain.
It absorbs it entirely.
That is such a vivid, bizarre, and frankly horrifying example, but it perfectly illustrates the point. Once you don't need to move, you do not need a brain.
Nature doesn't tolerate wasteful biological overhead.
No, it doesn't. So if our brains evolved specifically to guide us through physical space, to hunt, to gather, to run away, then the brain must rely heavily on a massive, continuous stream of physical information coming from the body.
It has to.
It is not a one-way street where the brain commands the body. The body is constantly reporting back to the brain.
This brings us to the groundbreaking work of neuroscientist Antonio Damasio. He came up with what is known as the somatic marker hypothesis.
Somatic meaning the body.
Yes. According to Damasio, every significant event we experience in our lives is stored in our memory. But it's not just stored as cold objective data.
Okay.
It is bookmarked or tagged with the specific physical sensations we felt at that exact time.
Like what kind of sensations?
Like a tightening of the gut, a quickening of the pulse, a subtle shiver of dread, or a wave of warmth.
So it is like a multisensory file format. You don't just remember that a certain dog bit you. You remember the spike in heart rate and the feeling of adrenaline.
That is a brilliant way to put it. Now, when we face a new decision, especially a complex or highly ambiguous one where we don't have all the facts, which is exactly what trading is, our brain doesn't have the time or the capacity to logically calculate every possible outcome.
Right, there's just too much data.
Exactly. Instead, it uses what Damasio calls as if loops. In fractions of a second, the brain rapidly simulates the potential choices and essentially asks the body, how would this feel if we did this?
Oh, wow.
And the body, accessing those stored somatic markers, sends back faint physical echoes.
So these physical signals guide us.
Yes, they guide us towards safe choices and violently steer us away from danger. And this often happens long before our conscious, rational mind has any idea what is going on.
So the body is essentially acting as an advanced early warning radar system.
That is exactly what it is.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how fast is this radar? Because we always hear about gut feelings, but people usually dismiss them as mystical or just confirmation bias.
Right, they think it's nonsense.
Yeah. But there is a famous experiment in the sources that proves exactly how fast and how physical this radar actually is. The Iowa gambling task. Walk us through how they set that up, because the methodology is brilliant.
Oh, the Iowa gambling task is a cornerstone of behavioral neuroscience. Researchers sat subjects down in front of 4 decks of cards. Let's call them decks A, B, C, and D.
Okay.
The subjects were given some play money and told the goal was to make as much money as possible by turning over cards from any deck they chose.
Sounds easy enough.
Right. Now, unbeknownst to the players, the game was rigged. Decks A and B were the bad decks. They offered massive payouts, which was very tempting, but they also contained catastrophic penalties.
Like penalties that would wipe you out.
Exactly, penalties that would ultimately bankrupt the player over time. Decks C and D were the good decks. The payouts were moderate, but the penalties were small, leading to steady long-term profit.
Okay, so it is a classic risk-reward puzzle. And conscious humans should be able to figure that out eventually, right? You just track your wins and losses.
Eventually, yes. It typically took the subjects turning over about 50 cards before they started to form a conscious hunch that decks A and B were dangerous.
50 cards just for a hunch.
Yes, and it took about 80 cards before they could confidently articulate the actual math behind the rigging.
Right, so their rational prefrontal cortex took 80 turns to solve the puzzle.
But here's the critical part. As the subjects played, the researchers had them hooked up to a polygraph-like device. They were monitoring their skin conductance response.
Which is measuring tiny, imperceptible spikes in sweat on the fingertips, right?
Yes. The eccrine sweat glands are directly wired to the sympathetic nervous system. That is the fight-or-flight system.
Okay.
When you perceive a threat, even subconsciously, your nervous system triggers a microburst of sweat to increase friction on your hands and feet. It is an ancient evolutionary relic for running or climbing.
That is so interesting.
What the researchers found was astonishing. By the 10th card, long before the 50 cards needed for a conscious hunch, and way before the 80 cards needed for logical understanding, the subject's skin conductance began to spike dramatically.
Wait, really? By card 10?
By card 10, and it spiked whenever their hands simply reached toward the bad decks.
That is incredible. So by card 10, their body had already recognized the dangerous statistical pattern.
It had.
The body was physically warning them, literally making their fingertips sweat, screaming at them to steer clear of the bad decks. Meanwhile, their conscious, rational brain was still entirely in the dark. It was probably still thinking, hey, let's go for the big payout. But their biological radar had already solved the complex mathematical puzzle.
And importantly, the somatic markers weren't just warning them. They were subtly guiding their physical behavior.
How so?
Well, even without knowing why, the subjects started to favor the good decks. This proves that our gut feelings are not mystical at all. They are real, high-speed, physiological data transfers based on massive subconscious pattern recognition.
I just love the irony here. I mean, if you think about Wall Street, you have these rocket scientists, literal ex-physicists and mathematicians with PhDs,
Right.
and they're building these incomprehensible, multi-layered algorithms to predict the market. They spend billions on supercomputers.
Yes, they do.
Yet the human gut, this ancient biological system that we inherited from hunter-gatherers, is processing massive amounts of complex, nonlinear pattern data far faster than the conscious brain can even comprehend.
It is incredibly efficient.
But this biological radar, these somatic markers, they are entirely dependent on how our bodies perceive information, right? Because a trader isn't running from a lion, they are staring at a Bloomberg terminal.
True.
So how does the body translate flashing numbers into physical arousal?
Well, that requires us to look at how the nervous system actually defines information. In the context of a trading floor, information isn't just text on a screen.
What is it then?
Biologically, true information is perceived strictly as novelty. This aligns perfectly with Claude Shannon's pioneer work in information theory.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Shannon proved mathematically that true information is synonymous with unpredictability. If a message is entirely predictable, like if I tell you the sun will rise tomorrow, it contains zero real information.
Because it doesn't change your model of the world.
Exactly. Our sensory systems have evolved over millions of years to adopt this exact principle. They are designed to completely ignore constant predictable states. They only snap to attention when something novel occurs.
The sources bring up a couple of wild examples of this sensory filtering, like the phenomenon of highway hypnosis.
Yes.
If you are listening to this and you've ever driven down a perfectly straight, featureless highway in the middle of the night, you know exactly what this is. You are completely starved of novel visual information.
Right.
The road doesn't change. The hum of the engine doesn't change. And because it is completely predictable, your brain basically starts to aggressively filter it out to save energy.
It just shuts it off.
Yeah, you become hypnotized. You zone out so profoundly that there are documented cases of drivers steering directly into the flashing lights of a parked police car, simply because it is the only visually stimulating thing in their environment. Their brain just locked on to the novelty.
It is terrifying, but biologically it makes perfect sense. The visual system of the common frog provides another stark example.
I love this one.
A frog's eye is built almost exclusively for detecting novelty. If a frog is sitting by a pond and nothing in its field of vision is moving, the frog is, for all practical purposes, blind to its surroundings.
Wait, let's back up. Are you saying the frog physically cannot see a stationary rock right in front of its face?
Its optical hardware receives the light bouncing off the rock, sure, but the brain simply discards the data because it contains no new information.
That is wild.
It only visually registers an object if it moves, like an insect flying by, which is a novel opportunity for food, or the shadow of a bird passing over, which is a novel threat. The constant background is just edited out completely.
Humans actually have a very similar mechanism called Troxler fading, right?
We do. If you fixate your eyes on a stationary object perfectly without moving them at all, that object will literally disappear from your conscious awareness within seconds.
So why doesn't the world constantly fade out on us?
The only reason it doesn't is because our eye muscles are making tiny, involuntary, microscopic movements called microsaccades. They are constantly refreshing the image on the retina to artificially create novelty.
Okay, so if our entire sensory apparatus is biologically tuned to ignore the constant and hyper-focus on the unexpected, the novel, well, think about what a trading floor is.
It is overwhelming.
It's the ultimate engineered avalanche of novelty. Every breaking news headline, every microsecond tick of the stock ticker, every unexpected geopolitical event flashing on the screen.
Exactly.
To a trader, market volatility isn't just a math problem on a spreadsheet. It is a physical drumbeat of nonstop novelty.
And that relentless drumbeat is constantly triggering a primitive, deep brain structure called the locus coeruleus.
Locus coeruleus.
Yes. Think of it as the brain's central dispatcher for emergencies and opportunities. When it detects novelty, it sprays a powerful neuromodulator called noradrenaline throughout the entire brain.
What does that do?
Noradrenaline acts like turning up the brightness and the volume on your sensory cortex. It lowers your sensory threshold so you can hear the faintest sound, notice the slightest movement, and process information much faster.
So it really hones your focus.
Sharply narrows and focuses your attention. So when the market broadcasts its uncertainty and volatility, the trader's nervous system literally vibrates in sympathy. Information becomes a physical reaction.
Okay, so if the body is this highly tuned radar system constantly scanning the horizon for novelty, what happens when it picks up a massive, unexpected opportunity? Not a threat, but a huge opportunity. Like, say, a booming stock market.
Ah, yes.
A 2-year bull run where everyone around you is getting incredibly rich.
Mm.
Because this is where we cross from basic sensory perception into the really wild endocrinology. The sources call it the fuel of exuberance.
This is where we enter the territory of the winner effect. To understand the irrational exuberance that inflates financial bubbles, we have to step away from economics entirely and look at animal behavioral biology.
Okay, I'm ready for this.
Field biologists studying male primates, rodents, and birds have long observed a fascinating phenomenon. When an animal enters a competition, whether for territory status or a mate, and wins that competition, it experiences a significant, immediate surge in the hormone testosterone.
And we need to be clear here because pop culture gets this wrong all the time. This isn't just a psychological mood boost like feeling happy you won a game of chess. This hormone literally alters their physical architecture, right?
Profoundly. Testosterone is an anabolic steroid. Anabolic means it builds tissue.
Right.
Unlike other chemical messengers that attach to the outside of a cell, testosterone is lipid-soluble. It passes right through the cell membrane, enters the nucleus, binds directly to the DNA, and alters gene transcription.
Wow.
In the aftermath of a victory, this testosterone surge acts as a systemic upgrade. It increases the animal's lean muscle mass. It increases the oxygen-carrying capacity of its blood by stimulating red blood cell production. And critically, it crosses the blood-brain barrier.
And what happens in the brain?
In the brain, it binds to androgen receptors, physically altering neural circuits to increase the animal's confidence, persistence, and appetite for risk.
So the animal is physically and psychologically upgraded.
Precisely. And here is the kicker. Because the animal is now flooded with this hormone, it enters its next fight with an already elevated baseline of testosterone.
Oh, I see where this is going.
This androgenic priming gives it a massive biological edge. It is stronger, faster, and more fearless, and that greatly increases its chances of winning that next fight as well.
And if it wins again?
It gets another surge. Winning literally changes the animal's biochemistry to promote further winning. It is a biological positive feedback loop.
Now, before we go further into how this applies to the trading floor, I have to bring up a detail from the sources because it is just too good to ignore. And it perfectly illustrates how misunderstood this hormone is.
I think I know which detail you mean.
When we talk about testosterone, it is so heavily mythologized. It's got this reputation as this magical elixir of ultimate manliness.
It certainly does.
And back in 1889, there was this highly respected French-American neurologist named Charles Edouard Brown-Séquard. This guy was 72 years old, highly credentialed, and he announced to the scientific community in Paris that he had formulated a rejuvenating elixir of life.
Yes, the infamous elixir.
And what was it? He was literally injecting himself with a liquid extracted from the crushed testicles of dogs and guinea pigs.
It is a remarkable, albeit slightly disturbing, piece of scientific history. You can only imagine the reaction of the Parisian elite in 1889.
Seriously?
He claimed this concoction restored his youthful vigor, his physical strength, and his mental acuity. It kicked off this crazed worldwide obsession with isolating virility hormones.
I mean, the placebo effect must have been working overtime for him, right? Because biologically, injecting raw guinea pig bits into your arm isn't going to give you a functional hormonal response.
Not at all. The testosterone molecule would be degraded almost instantly, not to mention the severe immune reaction he likely risked. Modern science tells us his results were almost entirely placebo.
That makes sense.
It wasn't until the 1930s that scientists finally managed to isolate and synthesize the actual testosterone molecule, a feat that eventually won a Nobel Prize.
Right.
But that early, hyped-up mythology, the idea of a magic potion of aggression and dominance, still clouds how we view the hormone today. It isn't a magic potion. It is simply a highly potent molecular messenger that coordinates a body-wide preparation for physical competition.
And John Coates, our author, took this exact biological mechanism, the winner effect, from evolutionary biology and tested it on an actual trading floor in the City of London.
Yes, he did.
He wanted to see if human traders making money experienced the same physical feedback loop as a baboon winning a fight for dominance. And the logistics of this are amazing. He is out there swabbing the saliva of active traders at 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. while they are screaming into phones and smashing keyboards.
A very chaotic laboratory.
Absolutely. And the results were staggering. He found that if a trader had higher than average testosterone levels in the morning saliva swab, they went on to make significantly more money in the afternoon.
Which is a finding that completely shatters the fundamental bedrock of modern finance.
The efficient market hypothesis.
Yes. That hypothesis argues that markets are perfectly rational and random, and that no individual human trait or mood can reliably predict trading success.
Right, they think it's all just math.
Yet here was Coates demonstrating that a biological molecule, a steroid hormone, was actively predicting profitability on a daily basis. And it goes even deeper into human development.
Yeah, the finger thing.
Yes, Coates found a bizarre physical marker of this hormonal predisposition. He looked at the 2D to 4D ratio of the traders.
I found this part so weird, but so fascinating. For anyone listening, hold up your hand right now. Look at the length of your index finger, your second digit, 2D compared to your ring finger, your fourth digit, 4D.
Developmental biologists have discovered that the 2D to 4D ratio is a reliable biomarker of how much testosterone a person was exposed to in the womb during the first trimester of fetal development.
That is just crazy. How does that work?
Well, this happens because the same Hox genes that control the development of our digits also control the development of the urogenital system. Essentially, a longer ring finger relative to the index finger indicates a higher bath of prenatal testosterone.
Okay.
Coates measured the fingers of these high-frequency traders and discovered something remarkable. Traders with a lower 2D to 4D ratio, meaning a longer ring finger and higher prenatal testosterone exposure, were not only more profitable on a day-to-day basis, but they also survived significantly longer in the brutal, highly competitive industry of algorithmic trading.
So a hormone they were exposed to as a fetus, months before they were even born, was predicting their career longevity and profit margins on Wall Street decades later.
It is truly mind-bending.
It really is. But we need to clarify how this testosterone is actually working on the floor. Because we established it is not a magic potion. It is not making these traders smarter. It is not making them suddenly better at calculus or giving them insider information.
No, the mechanics of it are quite specific. When Coates analyzed the data, he looked at their Sharpe ratio.
What's that?
The Sharpe ratio is a standard metric of skill in finance. It essentially measures how consistently you make money relative to the amount of risk you take on. A high Sharpe ratio means you are a highly skilled, efficient trader.
Okay, got it.
Coates found that the morning testosterone surge did not improve the trader's Sharpe ratio. They weren't becoming smarter or more precise.
And what did it do?
What the testosterone did do was dramatically increase their risk tolerance. It shifted their biological risk-reward calculus, making them willing to place larger and larger bets on thinner and thinner margins.
The sources illustrate this beautifully with the story of a trader named Scott.
Yes, Scott is a great example.
So Scott isn't some cowboy day trader. He runs a classic, sophisticated arbitrage strategy. He looks for tiny pricing discrepancies between a company's stock price and its bond price. It is supposed to be a completely safe, market-neutral strategy.
Exactly. You buy the undervalued asset and you short or bet against the overvalued one. As long as the prices eventually converge to their historical mean, you make money regardless of whether the overall market goes up or down.
Standard hedge fund stuff.
Right?
But Scott is operating in the middle of a raging multi-year bull market. Every spread bet he makes seems to be winning. The market is just handing him money. His biology is experiencing an unbroken string of victories.
Which means his body is continuously flooded with testosterone.
Right. And what happens to his strategy?
The biology supersedes the strategy. As testosterone continues to rise through successive victories, it begins to alter the prefrontal cortex, heavily weighting the brain's assessment toward positive outcomes while aggressively dampening the perception of negative outcomes or tail risks.
So he just stops seeing the downside.
Exactly. In animals, when this happens, they eventually slide from confident to completely delusional.
Like the baboons.
Yes. A dominant male primate with runaway testosterone will start picking fights with multiple rivals it can't possibly beat. Or it will patrol too far out into the open savanna, completely neglecting its own safety. It usually ends up being eaten by a predator because its biological risk assessment machinery has broken down.
And Scott does the exact same thing. He abandons the safe, hedged arbitrage strategy. He just starts naked longing massive S&P futures. He stops hedging entirely and just bets blindly that the market will keep going up forever.
It is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, he builds a massive concentrated position of thousands of contracts where every 1% move in the market makes or loses him over $3 million. He has become the biological equivalent of the baboon wandering into the lion's den.
He is experiencing biological hubris. He has had such an unbroken string of successes that his testosterone levels are chronically elevated. He begins to feel infallible, like a master of the universe.
Oh, fear it all.
He feels no fear, only an aggressive, expanding, insatiable desire to dominate the market. The rational trader has been completely replaced by the biological imperative of the winner effect.
But I want to push back on this a little bit. Is it just testosterone? Because taking risks like that, it feels good. It feels euphoric.
That is a very important point.
When you read accounts of these guys, when they are in the zone, staring at the screens, making millions of dollars a minute, they describe it like a drug high. Testosterone is a steroid. It builds muscle and aggression. Where is the actual psychological reward coming from? What is the chemical that makes the risk so addictive?
That is the crucial missing piece. To fully understand market exuberance, we have to look at the powerful synergy between testosterone and dopamine.
Dopamine.
Dopamine is arguably one of the most famously misunderstood neurotransmitters in popular science. If you read magazine articles, you often hear it referred to as the pleasure molecule or the reward chemical.
Right, implying that when you eat a piece of chocolate or win a bet, dopamine is what makes it feel good.
Exactly. But neuroscientists have discovered that dopamine's primary function isn't really about the pleasure of consumption. It is about the intense pleasure of anticipation.
Right, there's that famous experiment with the monkeys and the sources.
Yes, the Wolfram-Schultz experiments.
The researchers gave a monkey a squirt of sweet juice, and they monitored the dopamine neurons in its brain. When the monkey got the juice, the dopamine spiked. Classic reward.
True.
But then they changed the setup. They played a specific sound, like a bell, right before they gave the monkey the juice. Over time, the monkey learned the association, and the dopamine spike actually moved forward in time.
This is the critical part.
It spiked when the monkey heard the bell, before it even tasted the juice. When it finally got the juice, the dopamine neuron stayed quiet. The reward was already expected.
That temporal shift is everything. Dopamine is a reward prediction error signal, but more functionally, it is a motivational driver.
It drives the thrill of the hunt.
Yes, it motivates the organism to explore, to seek, to take risks in anticipation of a future reward. In our evolutionary past, dopamine is the chemical engine that pushed early humans to explore over the next dangerous hill, to try a new, risky hunting technique, or to build boats and cross oceans. It rewards the seeking behavior.
So it is the thrill of the chase.
Exactly. And the dopamine system is exceptionally sensitive to unexpected rewards.
Unpredictable stuff.
Right. If you get a predictable reward every day at 5 p.m., your dopamine system eventually habituates to it. It levels off. But if you receive a massive, unpredictable reward, like hitting the jackpot on a slot machine or making a massive, unexpected windfall in the volatile financial markets, dopamine positively floods the brain's reward centers, creating a euphoric, almost manic high.
I mean, think about it. A modern trading floor is basically the ultimate, highly calibrated dopamine delivery system ever invented.
It absolutely is.
It is a continuous, relentless stream of novel information that results in massive, highly unpredictable financial rewards. And you have testosterone acting as the baseline foundation, jacking up the risk appetite and suppressing fear. And dopamine acting as the acute, high-frequency hit of euphoria every time a trade goes well.
It is a remarkably potent cocktail. And to understand how vulnerable we are to this kind of system, we should look at the rat park experiment mentioned in the text.
Tell us about Rat Park.
In the 1970s, psychologist Bruce Alexander challenged the standard biological model of addiction. The standard experiments of the time involved putting a rat alone in a bare, tiny metal cage with 2 water bottles, one with normal water and one laced with morphine or heroin.
Very bleak.
Under those conditions, the isolated rats inevitably drank the drug water, became heavily unstead, and often drank themselves to death.
Which makes sense. I mean, if you lock someone in a closet with nothing but heroin, they're going to take the heroin.
Right. But Alexander argued the cage itself was the problem, so he built Rat Park. It was a massive, highly enriched environment. It had running wheels, tubes to explore, nesting areas, and critically, a large community of other male and female rats to socialize and play with.
Sounds like rat paradise.
It was. When rats were placed in Rat Park and offered the same 2 water bottles, the results were entirely different. They overwhelmingly preferred the plain water.
Wait, really? They just ignored the drugs?
They occasionally sampled the drug water, but they almost never became addicted. The implication is profound. In an enriched environment, normal play, exploration, and social interaction provide all the necessary healthy dopamine hits the brain requires.
But if you are starved of that enriched environment,
Yeah,
if you are trapped in a sterile cage, your brain desperately seeks out the artificial hits just to survive.
exactly.
And the sources raise this incredibly provocative question for the listener. Have we, in our modern, corporate, sedentary, screen-obsessed lives, essentially put ourselves in the bear cage?
It is a sobering thought.
We sit in cubicles under fluorescent lights, staring at spreadsheets. And for a trader, sitting in that high-stress, physically static environment, the market provides the ultimate high-stakes synthetic drug.
Dopamine and testosterone are working together to create this euphoric, delusional, risk-taking bubble.
The trader literally becomes biologically addicted to the volatility and the profit.
Indeed, it is a behavioral addiction driven by profound chemical changes. And just like the overly aggressive male elephant or the delusional baboon that wanders too far out into the open, the trader's radically inflated risk profile sets the stage for a catastrophic, inevitable fall. Because as any financial historian will tell you, markets inevitably run out of buyers, they turn.
And when they turn hard, and the biology snaps. So we've talked about the bubble, the exuberance. Let's talk about the crash, the molecule of pessimism. Let's set the scene again.
Let's do it.
It is late autumn. The economic data is suddenly looking terrible. Housing prices are dropping. Banks stop lending to each other overnight. The once euphoric, roaring bull market stalls, stutters, and then starts to plunge.
The music stops.
That trading floor, which was just this loud, raucous, testosterone-fueled party, goes dead silent. The screens are a sea of red. Scott, our trader, who abandoned his safe strategy to ride the bubble, who's a master of the universe just a few weeks ago, is now watching his multi-million-dollar profits vanish by the second, and his biology is about to undergo a violent systemic shift.
The environment has radically shifted from a landscape of abundant opportunity to one of severe immediate threat. In response, the body abruptly abandons the anabolic testosterone-driven state.
The dopamine tap is shut off.
Completely, and the nervous system triggers a massive stress response. Now, when we use the word stress in daily life, we often use it to mean feeling annoyed or busy or psychologically overwhelmed.
Like being stuck in traffic.
Right. But biologically, stress is a highly orchestrated, massive mobilization of the body's internal resources designed to survive an immediate life or death physical threat.
And what dictates how bad that biological response is?
The severity of that biological stress response is dictated by three primary environmental triggers: novelty, uncertainty, and uncontrollability.
And a market crash hits all three of those triggers perfectly. Think about it. It is highly novel. Every crash has a different catalyst, so nobody knows exactly how this specific crisis will unfold.
Right.
It is intensely uncertain. The extreme volatility means prices are swinging wildly, and you don't know if a stock is going to bounce back in 5 minutes or drop to zero. But the third one, uncontrollability, that is the real killer, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Because a single trader, no matter how smart they are, cannot stop a global macroeconomic panic. They are strapped into the roller coaster.
Uncontrollability is arguably the most toxic element for human biology. The text highlights the famous Whitehall studies to prove this.
Right, the civil service studies.
These were massive longitudinal health studies looking at the British civil service. They examined thousands of workers across all levels of the bureaucratic hierarchy.
And what did they assume they would find?
The initial assumption by many doctors was that the executives at the very top, the people with the highest demands, the most responsibility, the most stressful jobs, would suffer the highest rates of heart attacks and stress-related illnesses.
The classic executive stress myth.
Precisely the opposite was true. The researchers found that workers in the lower-ranking jobs, the clerks, the typists, the messengers who had high demands placed on them but very little control over how they executed their daily tasks, suffered significantly higher rates of hypertension, heart disease, and early mortality than their bosses.
Wait, really? The bosses were healthier?
Yes. The executives had higher absolute demands, but they had autonomy. They could delegate, they could set their schedules. That element of control acted as a powerful biological buffer against the physical damage of stress.
There is also that amazing medical example in the sources of patient-controlled analgesia. When hospital patients recovering from surgery were given a small button to administer their own pain medication, like a morphine trip, rather than waiting helplessly in bed for a nurse to bring a pill on a fixed schedule, they actually ended up using significantly less medication
They
overall.
felt they were in charge.
Exactly. Just having the illusion of control, knowing that the button was there and they could press it if the pain got too bad, massively reduced their physiological stress response and their subjective experience of pain.
It perfectly illustrates that control mitigates stress. But in a global market crash, control completely evaporates. You are at the mercy of the herd.
So what happens inside the body when that panic hits?
Now, in the initial stages of a shock, say, the first hour of a massive market sell-off, the body releases adrenaline and noradrenaline. This is the classic acute stress response, the fight-or-flight mechanism.
And that kicks in fast.
Adrenaline acts in seconds. It dilates your pupils, accelerates your heart rate, and pulls readily available glucose from the liver to provide a quick burst of energy to either fight the predator or run away.
Acute stress is actually quite invigorating, isn't it?
It is. It sharpens focus and makes you feel alive. But a market crash doesn't last for a few minutes. It drags on for days, weeks, sometimes years of grinding uncertainty. And this is where the biology turns incredibly dark.
Because you can't run on adrenaline forever. You run out of quick glucose. So the body calls in the heavy artillery, enter cortisol. If we connect this to the bigger picture, things get really bad.
When a threat persists and the acute response isn't enough, the hypothalamus signals the adrenal glands to start pumping out a potent steroid hormone called cortisol.
And what is its job?
Cortisol's primary job is entirely different from adrenaline. Adrenaline is for the sprint, cortisol is for the siege.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
It prepares the body for a prolonged period of starvation or injury. To do this, it issues a body-wide command. We need fuel now. It needs to flood the bloodstream with glucose to keep the brain and major muscles functioning.
But because the quick reserves in the liver are already depleted by the adrenaline, cortisol has to find that energy somewhere else.
And it does that by cannibalizing the body, right?
Yes. Cortisol initiates a process called gluconeogenesis. It literally begins to strip mine the body's own tissues. It breaks down muscle protein to convert it to glucose. That sounds terrible.
It gets worse. Furthermore, because it needs to conserve energy for the immediate survival of the siege, it systematically shuts down any biological system that isn't essential for the next 5 minutes.
Like what?
It shuts down the digestive system. It shuts down the reproductive system. It severely suppresses the immune system, leaving you highly vulnerable to infection.
I love the analogy the author uses for this. It makes it so clear. Let's build this out. Having chronic cortisol in your system is like having a fire brigade show up to save your house from a burning emergency.
Right, the adrenaline is the fire brigade rushing in, breaking down the door, and hosing down the living room to put out the immediate flames. It causes some mess, but it saves the structure. That's the acute response.
But chronic stress, chronic cortisol, is when the fire brigade puts out the fire, but then they just leave the massive fire hoses running at full blast inside your living room for months on end.
Exactly.
They save the house from the initial fire, only to completely destroy the structural foundation, warp the wood, and ruin the drywall with massive, unrelenting water damage. That is what chronic stress does to the human body. The survival mechanism becomes the thing that kills you. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It is a devastatingly accurate analogy. Chronic cortisol exposure leads to gastric ulcers, severe hypertension, the buildup of visceral fat around the organs, and extensive cardiovascular damage.
So what does it do to the brain?
Perhaps most dangerously for the financial markets, it profoundly alters the brain. Unlike many chemicals, cortisol easily crosses the blood-brain barrier. During chronic exposure, it enters the hippocampus and the amygdala, and it begins to physically rewire the brain's neural pathways.
It rewires them.
Yes, it promotes a state of profound, generalized anxiety. It actually causes the brain to preferentially recall negative memories and fixate on past failures.
And this is where we connect the biology back to the macroeconomics, because it physically changes how you perceive risk.
Exactly. Think of Scott, our trader. During the bubble, his testosterone-drenched brain saw nothing but endless opportunity. He was doubling down on massive risks without breaking a sweat.
Right.
But now, after months of grinding losses, his brain is marinated in cortisol. His amygdala, the brain's fear center, is hyperactivated and enlarged. He is now biologically incapable of seeing a good investment.
Even if it's a great deal.
Even if an incredibly safe, highly profitable asset is sitting right in front of him, his brain filters it out. He sees danger everywhere, even where it doesn't exist. This is the physiological basis of what economists call irrational pessimism.
The entire trading community, subjected to this prolonged barrage of uncertainty, loss, and cortisol, essentially becomes a clinical population. They are suffering from mass, chemically induced depression and anxiety.
Yes.
They develop what psychologists call learned helplessness. Like animals in a lab who have been shocked repeatedly with no way to escape, they eventually just lie down and give up. Even when a door is open, they don't try to leave.
It's tragic.
And this right here is why standard economic models completely fail during a severe crash. The textbook says that when the market crashes and liquidity dries up, central banks should step in and lower interest rates, make borrowing money incredibly cheap, which should theoretically entice rational traders to start buying risky assets again and kickstart the economy.
But it doesn't work.
Right. In 2008 and in other major crashes, it doesn't work. The central banks pump billions into the system, and the banks just hoard it.
It fails because the economists are relying on models that assume they are dealing with rational calculating machines. But the central bankers aren't dealing with calculators. They are dealing with a traumatized, hormonally paralyzed population.
You can offer them free money, and they still won't take it.
You can lower interest rates to zero, but a trader whose brain is drowning in cortisol, whose amygdala is screaming in fear, and who has developed learned helplessness is not going to take a risk. They are physically incapable of pulling the trigger.
The biological shift has completely superseded the economic incentives. The body has vetoed the math.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the biology of the market inevitably swings us from the reckless, testosterone-fueled euphoria of a bubble to the paralyzed, cortisol-drenched despair of a crash, well, how does anyone actually survive in this industry?
It is a great question.
I mean, there are people out there, legendary investors, who manage money for decades without blowing up their funds or dying of a massive stress-induced heart attack at age 40. How do the truly elite performers, and not just in finance, but in any high-stakes field, manage this intense physical roller coaster?
That brings us to a remarkable, often overlooked component of our nervous system, the vagus nerve.
A vagus nerve.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight accelerator that pumps out adrenaline and cortisol. But the body has an opposing system called the parasympathetic nervous system, often called the rest and digest system.
And the vagus nerve is part of that.
And the primary superhighway for this calming system is the vagus nerve. It is a massive nerve bundle that originates in the brainstem and wanders. Vagus means wandering down through the neck, directly connecting to the vocal cords, the heart, the lungs, and the entire digestive tract.
Okay, so how do elite performers use it?
To understand that, we have to look at the work of researcher Stephen Porges, who has mapped the fascinating evolutionary history of the vagus nerve, dividing it into 3 distinct developmental stages.
This evolutionary history is wild. Stage 1 is the oldest part, the reptilian part.
Yes. In reptiles, and retained deep within the human nervous system, the most primitive response to an overwhelming, inescapable threat is the freeze response.
Right.
This is orchestrated by the unmyelinated oldest branch of the vagus nerve. When triggered, it dramatically drops the heart rate, plummets blood pressure, and slows metabolism to a crawl, essentially feigning death. You see this in diving marine mammals conserving oxygen underwater, or in wild rodents caught in the jaws of a predator.
And sometimes it is so powerful it can actually kill the animal, right? Like rodents who fall into water and literally suffer cardiac arrest from their own massive freeze response, not from drowning.
Yes, that happens.
It is the biological mechanism behind documented cases of voodoo death in humans, where someone dies purely from the profound physiological shock and conviction of a curse, their hearts simply stopped by their own vagus nerve. You can actually trigger a very mild version of this ancient freeze reflex in yourself just by splashing freezing cold water on your face.
The mammalian dive reflex.
Exactly. You'll feel your heart rate drop instantly.
Okay, so obviously freezing and playing dead doesn't work well on a trading floor. You can't just pass out under your Bloomberg terminal. How did mammalian biology upgrade that system? What is stage 2?
Stage 2 evolved with early mammals. Here, a newer myelinated branch of the vagus nerve acts as a sophisticated brake on the heart. During normal, calm activity, the body's fight-or-flight sympathetic engine is actually always running slightly, ready to go.
Always idling high.
But the vagus nerve applies a constant vagal brake, keeping the heart rate calm, steady, and metabolically efficient. When a threat or a challenge appears, the nervous system doesn't need to immediately dump massive, toxic amounts of adrenaline and cortisol to get the heart rate up. It just takes the brake off.
Instead, the vagus nerve simply lifts the brake. It withdraws its calming influence, allowing the heart rate to instantly accelerate.
This is where that drag racing analogy comes in, and I think it perfectly explains the mechanics. Imagine a massive, high-powered drag racing car sitting at the starting line. The driver has the gas pedal smashed to the floor, revving the engine to the absolute maximum, but the car isn't moving because the driver has the emergency brakes locked tight.
It is primed to move.
The second the starting light turns green, the driver doesn't need to slowly build up engine speed. The power is already there. They just let off the brake, and the car rockets forward instantaneously. That is what the vagal brake does for our body. It keeps us perfectly prepped for immediate action, but safely restrained, conserving massive amounts of metabolic energy.
That is an excellent mechanical analogy. And stage 3, the most recently evolved part of the vagus nerve, is highly developed in humans. Porges calls this the system of social engagement.
Social engagement.
It links our heart and lungs upward to the muscles of our face, our vocal cords, and our middle ear. When we face a challenge or a threat, our most advanced, metabolically efficient first response isn't to fight or flee, it is to use diplomacy.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
It's to make reassuring eye contact, to use a calm, modulated vocal tone, to negotiate, to seek help from the tribe.
Because talking your way out of a fight costs way fewer calories than actually fighting.
Exactly. It's an evolutionary hierarchy. If social engagement fails, we drop back to the evolutionary stage 2. We lift the vagal brake and prepare for fight or flight. And if that fails and we are physically trapped, we drop back to the ancient stage 1, the profound shutdown of freezing.
So how does this neurobiology apply to the elite traders? The sources mention 2 specific examples: a veteran, highly successful trader named Martin, and a former professional tennis player turned trader named Gwen. When the market starts going absolutely crazy around them, when prices are crashing and alarms are going off, they don't look like Scott. Scott is sweating, his heart is pounding out of his chest, he's drowning in cortisol. Martin and Gwen look incredibly calm. They look like they are cruising.
Because Martin and Gwen have developed exceptional vagal tone, elite performers, whether they are world-class athletes stepping up to serve at Wimbledon, special forces soldiers entering a compound, or top-tier traders navigating a crash, have trained their nervous systems to operate highly efficiently.
So what do they do differently?
When a sudden market shock occurs, they don't immediately trigger a massive, metabolically expensive and toxic cortisol dump. Instead, they just slightly release their vagal brake. Their heart rate goes up, their focus narrows, but they handle the complex, high-stakes situation using their body's idle speed.
They're cruising through chaos. They're using the precise amount of physiological arousal necessary to solve the problem, and not an ounce more. And you can actually measure this biological efficiency, right, through heart rate variability.
Yes. Heart rate variability, or HRV, is the gold standard indicator of vagal tone and overall nervous system resilience. Most people think a healthy heart beats like a metronome, perfectly evenly spaced.
Yeah, you would think regular is better.
But that's actually a sign of illness. When you breathe in, the sympathetic nervous system slightly speeds up your heart rate to move oxygenated blood. When you breathe out, the vagus nerve exerts its brake and slows the heart rate down. This constant micro-fluctuation in the milliseconds between beats is your HRV.
So a highly variable heart rate is actually a good thing.
A very good thing. High HRV indicates a healthy, highly responsive, flexible vagus nerve that is constantly, dynamically calibrating the body's state to the exact demands of the environment. A low HRV, where the heart just beats rigidly, unvarying, is a clinical sign of chronic stress. Exactly. When researchers monitor elite traders like Martin, they show extremely high HRV. They can mount a massive, sharp physiological response to a sudden market challenge, but crucially, the exact second the trade is over and the risk is mitigated, their strong vagus nerve clamps right back down, instantly shutting off the stress hormones and forcing the body back into a parasympathetic recovery state.
Challenge recovery. Challenge recovery. That is the secret of longevity. They don't let the fire hoses run in the living room for months. The second the fire's out, they shut off the water.
Precisely.
So if elite performers have this incredible flexible stress management built into their biology, it begs the obvious next question. Can the rest of us be trained to do this? If you aren't born with the vagus nerve of a Navy SEAL, can you toughen your body?
It's a vital question.
And even more importantly, can we restructure the actual financial markets, the corporations themselves, to stop these toxic biological feedback loops from constantly destroying the global economy?
The sources outline a comprehensive, two-pronged approach to solving this. Individual physiological toughening and structural systemic changes to the environment. Let's look at the individual level first.
Okay, lay it on me.
We have to return to the lab, specifically the fascinating work of psychologist Neil Miller. Miller wanted to understand stress resilience. He found that if you expose rats to chronic, unrelenting, unpredictable stress, like randomly spaced mild shocks over days, their noradrenaline completely depletes.
That sounds awful for the rats.
Their immune systems crash, they suffer physical illness, and they plunge into learned helplessness.
Which is exactly the biological profile of a trader trapped in a prolonged grinding bear market.
But if Miller altered the protocol and exposed the rats to acute, short-lived stress, a sharp shock followed by a guaranteed period of rest and safety, even if that acute stress was repeated frequently, something entirely different happened.
Do they still get sick?
The rats didn't get sick. They actually emerged with a harder, more robust physiology. Their enzymatic machinery for producing dopamine and noradrenaline actually grew more dense. They built a physical immunity to the damaging effects of future unpredictable stress.
That is amazing.
This is the biological principle of inoculation. It's exactly how physical training works for athletes. You intensely stress the muscle by lifting a heavy weight, you rest and recover, and the tissue grows back stronger to handle the load next time.
So how does a human being, say a stressed out office worker or a trader, build that kind of mental and nervous system toughness through physical means? Because you can't just randomly shock yourself. The sources mention some really specific, actionable techniques. Obviously, rigorous aerobic exercise is a huge one.
Yes, exercise is critical.
It acts like fertilizer for the brain, releasing neurotrophic factors that build new neurons and physically expanding the capacity of the cells that manufacture dopamine and noradrenaline. But the really fascinating, almost extreme technique mentioned is cold exposure. Winter swimming, or the Nordic practice of sitting in a boiling hot sauna, followed immediately by a plunge into a freezing lake.
The science behind cold exposure is incredibly compelling for nervous system training. When you willingly submerge your body in freezing water, you force your system to mount a massive acute survival response.
Because your body thinks it is dying.
Right. But because it is a purely physical stressor, it trains the body to rely on the clean, fast action of adrenaline and noradrenaline rather than the slow, toxic grind of cortisol. More importantly, it is a practice in top-down control.
What do you mean by top-down control?
You are using your prefrontal cortex to override the screaming panic of your ancient reptilian brain. And crucially, it trains the body to switch that massive arousal off rapidly once you step out of the cold and wrap yourself in a towel. You are actively exercising the thermal regulation and stress recovery systems that we inherited from our evolutionary ancestors, systems that have largely atrophied in our modern climate-controlled lives.
But practically speaking, if I am the CEO running a massive Wall Street bank, I can't exactly mandate that all my thousands of traders go jump in a frozen river in Central Park every morning before the opening bell. I mean, it'd be hilarious to watch, but HR wouldn't allow it.
I highly doubt they would.
So how do we actually implement systemic solutions in the workplace? How does a corporation manage the aggregate biology of an entire institution?
The first step for corporate management is to fundamentally understand where the most toxic stress actually originates. While the financial market itself provides a constant baseline of volatility and uncertainty, the sources argue forcefully that the most potent source of novel, uncertain, and uncontrollable stress on a trading floor or in any corporate office is actually middle management instability.
Oh, man. I guarantee anyone listening who works in a corporate job just nodded their heads so hard they pulled a muscle.
It is a universal corporate truth. During an economic crisis or a downturn, rumors inevitably swirl about layoffs, departmental reorganizations, and shifting responsibilities.
Yeah, the rumor mill.
Middle managers, who are themselves highly stressed and fearful for their jobs, often vent their frustration and anxiety downward, micromanaging or bullying their junior staff.
Yeah.
They constantly change targets and expectations. This creates an environment of total, suffocating uncontrollability for the employees.
That feeling of having no control.
Exactly. If senior management actually wants to stabilize the biological risk preferences of their traders to stop them from becoming paralyzed by cortisol and learned helplessness, they must aggressively intervene. They must restrain middle management from creating unnecessary internal chaos.
So shield the traders from the bureaucracy.
Clear communication, transparent targets, and shielding the staff from bureaucratic turbulence is not just good HR. It is a vital biological intervention to preserve the cognitive function of the workforce.
That makes total sense. Protect the humans from the bureaucracy so they can focus on the market. But the sources go deeper than just management styles. They look at how the actual risk and reward mechanics of financial incentives are structured.
Yes, the bonuses.
And this is where we get into the bonus structure. To explain this, the author uses this brilliant modern fable of the tortoise and the hare. Let's break down the math on this because it exposes exactly why Wall Street blew up in 2008. Imagine two traders working at the same bank. We have the tortoise. He is a steady, prudent, highly disciplined risk taker.
Very methodical.
He grinds out consistent returns. He makes the bank $10 million in pure profit a year, every year, for 5 years. The bank rewards him with a 10% cut, a $1 million cash bonus each year. So over the 5-year cycle, the bank makes $50 million, and the tortoise takes home $5 million.
It is a very solid, sustainable, and mutually beneficial arrangement.
But down the hall, you have the hare. The hare is our guy, Scott. He is drenched in testosterone, taking massive, unhedged, leveraged risks. For 4 years, the market is booming, the bubble is inflating, and the hare's massive bets pay off. He makes the bank $100 million a year.
Huge profits.
Right. To keep him from defecting to a rival hedge fund, the bank pays him a massive 20% cut, a staggering $20 million cash bonus at the end of each year. But then, year 5 arrives, the bubble bursts, the music stops. The hare's massive unhedged risks blow up spectacularly, and he loses the bank $500 million in a single catastrophic year.
And here is the fatal systemic flaw in the architecture of modern finance. The hare receives 0 bonus in year 5, obviously, but he does not have to give back the $80 million in cash he already collected over the previous 4 years of the bubble. That money is his, safely sitting in his bank account.
Exactly. Let's tally the final score of the fable. Over 5 years, the steady tortoise made the bank $50 million net profit and kept $5 million for himself. The reckless hare lost the bank $100 million net, completely destroying capital, but he personally pocketed $80 million.
It rewards reckless behavior.
If you are a young, highly ambitious, mathematically gifted trader looking at that incentive structure, which strategy are you going to choose? The system literally demands that you take maximum catastrophic risk because you get to privatize the massive gains during the boom and you get to socialize the massive losses onto the bank's shareholders or ultimately the taxpayer during the bust.
And this compensation structure perfectly, disastrously amplifies the biology of the winner effect. The endogenous testosterone is already pushing the trader's brain to take more risk, to feel infallible. And the external bonus structure is financially rewarding them with millions of dollars for doing exactly that. It pours gasoline on a biological fire.
So how do we fix it?
Coates proposes a radical structural solution to this. Defer the bonuses. Instead of paying out massive cash bonuses annually based on short-term variance, banks should hold that money in escrow and pay bonuses out over a full 4 to 5 year business cycle.
Oh, that changes everything.
If a trader makes huge profits for 3 years but blows up the fund in year 4, they lose the entire accumulated bonus pool.
It perfectly aligns the incentives. It forces the trader to actually care about the long-term viability and the tail risks of their trades. It acts as a structural financial brake on their biological exuberance. Okay, so we can fix the bonuses, we can fire the toxic middle managers, we can tell traders to go take ice baths, but the sources lead up to one final, highly provocative systemic solution. And it has to do with the actual physical demographic makeup of the trading floor.
Yes. If we accept the premise that market bubbles are largely driven by a dangerous, self-reinforcing feedback loop of testosterone in young males who historically make up the vast, overwhelming majority of personnel on trading floors, then the logical biological solution to stabilizing the market isn't just better math, it is biological diversity. So what does this all mean?
I love the analogy the text uses for this. Let's bring in the elephants.
It is a striking and incredibly apt analogy from wildlife conservation. In certain African wildlife reserves, park rangers encountered a massive, destructive problem with young male elephants. Without older elder males around to establish a social hierarchy and keep them in check, these young males would prematurely enter a state called must.
Must. What happens during must?
During must, their testosterone levels would surge 40 to 50 times above their normal baseline. They would become hyper-aggressive, essentially running amok. They would attack and kill other animals like rhinos for no reason. uproot trees, and trample local villages.
Just totally out of control.
The rangers didn't know what to do, but the solution wasn't to cull the young males. The rangers simply relocated a few older, massive elder male elephants into the reserve.
And what happened? Did the older males fight them?
They rarely had to. The mere physical presence of the elder males, their size, their low-frequency vocalizations, their dominant pheromones, instantly altered the social dynamics of the herd. It physically calmed the young rogues down and stabilized their runaway hormonal surges. The must periods shortened and normalized. The violence stopped.
So translating that biological reality to Wall Street, the solution to market instability is to aggressively hire more women and older men, because it changes the actual chemical composition of the room. Women, on average, have roughly 10 to 20% of the circulating testosterone of men.
Which completely changes their risk profile.
Right. That means their biology is fundamentally less susceptible to the manic, risk-blind feedback loops of the winner effect. And older men have naturally declining testosterone levels, paired with the invaluable physical somatic markers, the historical memory of having lived through and survived previous devastating market crashes.
It is a profound stabilizing force.
But how does that actually change the young guys? If I'm a 25-year-old trader jacked up on dopamine, how does a 55-year-old woman sitting next to me change my biology?
It changes it through the profound, often subconscious mechanisms of group biology and herd behavior. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to the physiological states of those around us. We communicate distress, panic, and aggression through microexpressions, shifts in vocal pitch, body language, and even chemical signals like stress pheromones in our sweat.
So we infect each other with our stress.
On a homogeneous floor of young men, panic or irrational exuberance is highly contagious. It reverberates and amplifies like feedback in a microphone. But if you diversify the floor, you introduce biological dampeners.
That is fascinating.
The absence of aggressive posturing, a calmer vocal tone, a more measured physical response to a loss from a female colleague or an older veteran, these cues are subconsciously processed by the young trader's nervous system. It literally acts as a social vagal brake, dampening the hormonal tidal waves that cause bubbles and crashes. You need the biological diversity of the whole village to safely manage the capital of society.
It is such a profound shift in perspective. We have to stop treating economics purely as a sterile mathematical discipline and start recognizing it as a messy, complex branch of human biology.
Absolutely.
If we accept the reality that our physical bodies, our hormones, and our ancient nervous systems are what actually drive our risk-taking, we can start engineering work environments and financial incentives that guide those powerful biological imperatives toward stable, sustainable growth, rather than recurring catastrophe.
Precisely. We cannot ignore the animal inside the trader.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've gone on an incredible journey today, starting from the ancient, brain-digesting sea squirt stuck to a rock, moving through the high-stakes, testosterone-soaked trading floors of the City of London, and diving deep into the molecular structures of dopamine anticipation and cortisol-induced panic.
We really have covered a lot.
We've seen how a surge in a single molecule can literally inflate a multi-billion-dollar global market bubble, and how the chronic drip of another can cause an entire economy to paralyze in fear. We are physical creatures, making physical decisions, driven by ancient evolutionary hardware, even when we are just staring at abstract numbers on a glowing computer screen.
And this leaves us with a final, rather provocative thought to consider, extending beyond just finance. We noted earlier how psychologist Walter Cannon, a pioneer in stress research, warned about the hidden dangers of entirely eliminating natural physical stress from our daily lives.
Right.
Through technology, we have engineered a modern world of perfect climate control, endless, easily accessible calories, and profound physical inertia. We rarely have to regulate our own body temperature against the biting cold or expend intense physical effort to secure our food.
We've put ourselves in the incredibly comfortable but completely unstimulating bear cage. We've removed the natural stressors that our bodies evolved to handle.
Exactly. And if our biological animal spirits, our gut feelings, our dopamine-driven desire to explore, our robust stress and recovery cycles are the very engines that dictate our economic and personal reality, what happens as these biological systems atrophy from chronic disuse?
That is a great question.
If we continue to live entirely in sterile environments where natural physical stress is engineered out, are our biological alarm systems destined to misfire even more disastrously in the future? When the inevitable financial, social, or personal crises hit, are we losing the very physical resilience required to navigate the risks of the modern world without collapsing into learned helplessness?
That is a question that definitely lingers. And it makes me want to go take a cold shower and go for a run. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden biology of the financial markets and our own bodies. The next time you have a major, complex decision to make, whether it is an investment, a career change, or relationship, take a moment, step away from the spreadsheet, be quiet, and listen closely to your own somatic markers. Notice your breathing. Notice the tension in your gut. Your body just might know the answer long before you do.